When we bend a tense string away from its equilibrium position and release it, the string will bounce back and forth until its energy has been dissipated and channeled through to the mass of the steel points holding it. On a guitar, these points are the nut and the saddle at the bridge, and both are meant to transmit this energy onto the guitar's body, but mainly to the soundboard. The soundboard is thin and flexible enough to mirror the vibrations of the string, and in turn move the air molecules surrounding it to create sound waves. Since it is a flat surface, it will vibrate more freely and move more air particles when the string vibrates perpendicular to its surface. The string will oscillate through the linear trajectory between the release point and its equilibrium position, and it can do so in any axis. However, the vibrations that will be amplified more efficiently will be the ones that are transverse to the soundboard. To make the string vibrate perpendicular to the soundboard, we will have to release the string either from the outer side of the normal or from the inner side of the normal. If we bend the string towards the outer side of the normal, we will need to pull the string, and when released, it will hit against the fret, producing an undesirable percussive sound in our tone. Our last and only option will then be to push the string towards the inner side of the normal before releasing it. The contact point and the angle of the distal phalanx are the two main variables that need to be precisely adjusted for the string to break through after the phalanx pushes the string to the inner side of its normal. However, the distal phalanx has no control over its angle respective to the string. This angle will depend on the position of its DIP joint, that is controlled by its parent joint, the PIP joint. This parent-child kinematic relation between two joints is very common in many systems, like on the blades of a propeller or the hands of a clock or a windshield wiper. There is one still point and another free point at the end that will submissively move through a fixed circular trajectory. Building a system where the still point and the free point are capable of switching roles would be much more complicated. In a two-joint system, we will be able to change the length of the radius without changing the mass of our system, or even coordinate the rotations to make the free point navigate through linear trajectories. Our obedient DIP is submissive to its parent, the PIP, who in turn is compliant to the orders of its parent, the MCP, who is defenseless to the authority of the wrist, and this of the elbow, and this of the shoulder. In this forward kinematic system, our distal phalanx is the last link of the chain, and thus its stability will be disturbed by the movement of any of the other joints. However, since its contact point with the string is a still point, the whole system will have to be capable of reversing itself and work with inverse kinematics to control the angle of the distal phalanx respective to the string. This angle can be controlled by the entire arm's position, which is controlled by the shoulder's rotator cuff, the great-grandparent of all the joints. Once the arm has produced an optimal angle for the distal phalanx, the DIP and the PIP can lock their angles and allow the MCP to flex and pluck the string. Although the adipose tissue of the fingertip surface is an excellent tool to push the string with, when it comes to the release, its rugged topography and squishy curved surface is not of the most optimal kind to snap out from. A properly sized and shaped nail can become a smooth path for the string to slide through towards its free edge, where it can suddenly break free. The nail has a natural curve on its plate and a natural curve on its folds. If we can shape the nail so that the flattened surface of the tip and the nail fold meet at an open angle of around 135 degrees, the string can smoothly slide through towards the free edge. When playing music, two alternating fingers like the index and the middle should be able to cope with the demands of most rhythms. But since the middle finger is longer, their distal phalanges will not arrive at the same angle. Since the index cannot become longer, to balance both distal phalanges, the middle finger will need to learn to relax its DIP joint. Although it sounds like a drastic workaround, this solution works surprisingly well and unlocks the efficiency of their alternations in the most demanding musical passages. After the release, the finger will inevitably land on the upper neighbor string, creating another contact point that will contribute to the hand stability, just like the thumb does. To navigate up and down to different strings, we will need to transport the fingers by moving the entire arm with the aid of the shoulder's rotator cuff, while maintaining the thumb anchored. All this literally sounds wonderful, but when we play the guitar polyphonically, like we do most of the times on the classical guitar, we will want to play many simultaneous and overlapping notes. So we will need to find a way to still push the string towards the soundboard, but release it in a different direction without touching the upper neighbor string. The strength of our fingers is of course limited, and we cannot afford to use their energy without a purpose, which implies that ideally our fingers should be completely relaxed when coming in contact with the strings. But when the fingers are completely loose, they curl inwards. The index curls the least, but the others gradually curl more and more, the pinky resting closest to the palm, and altogether the relaxed fingers are shaped like a surf wave. If we extend or flex our fingers and then relax them completely, they will bounce back to this default relaxed hand position. This gravitational force towards the relaxed position is very useful to us guitarists, as we will see, in part because by simply letting go, we can arrive to a set, predictable, and invariable position. The wonderful gift of nature to all guitarists is the geometry of the relaxed index finger, where the knuckle joint, or metacarpophalangeal joint, aka MCP joint, and the proximal interphalangeal joint, aka PIP joint, can independently move the fingertip through two different trajectories that intersect with each other. Each joint can independently move the tip of the finger through a portion of a unique circular trajectory, where the joint is the center and its distance to the tip its radius. If we compare the arcs that each joint can produce from the relaxed position, we see that each joint can move the tip in two different trajectories and through two intersecting axes. The flexion of the MCP joint is controlled by the lumbrical muscles, which arise from the flexor tendons on the palmar base of each finger and sweep around the lateral side of the proximal phalanx until they attach to the extensor tendon on the dorsal side of the finger, producing a simultaneous extension of the PIP joint while flexing the MCP joint when contracting. This muscle is responsible for the upper stroke when writing. When we consider the extension it produces on the PIP joint during the flexion of the MCP, which is followed by the PIP flexion, we will be glad to see that this sequence of movements provides the overall trajectory of the fingertip with an almost perpendicular turn. This mechanism gives the finger the ability to push and release the string without bumping onto the neighbor string. If we bring the relaxed index to a chosen string, we can bend and release it as long as the hand remains still, despite the increase of the string's resistance as the finger extends. The middle and ring fingers are blessed to have the index next to them as a role model and a reference. To adopt a proper playing position, the middle finger will need to abandon its center of gravity and extend slightly to line up with the index. The ring finger will need to move even farther, and both will have to learn to bounce back to this functional position after playing, even though it's not their center of gravity. The farther away from the relaxed position, the stronger the gravitational pull is towards it. This is why, if the ring and middle finger need to play 2 consecutive notes, there is a more natural flow when the ring plays first, since it will move closer to the palm than the middle finger, as it does in the relaxed position. The ring finger's effort to remain extended will become more stressful if the middle finger plays first and the ring has to wait for its turn. This functional position allows 2 or more fingers to alternately play on the same string on a parallel position, or to play on different corresponding strings on an oblique position. In both positions, the finger will push and bend the string perpendicular to the soundboard. Only the angle between the string and the release trajectory will vary on each position, but this should not affect the volume of our sound. This is why we are able to produce a consistent sound despite the rotation between positions. The amount of rotation needed to get from one position to another can be reduced by a slight extension of the middle and ring fingers on an oblique position and a slight flexion closer to the relaxed hand position on a parallel position. A properly shaped nail allows a sudden and more controlled release of the string. And even if we only engage the PIP and not the MCP, the string will move from the nail fall to the free edge and will still follow a trajectory that is perpendicular to the soundboard. Since in a playing position we can't really see where our fingertips are, the right hand is destined to work in the darkness. The only information as to the location of our fingers in respect to the strings comes through our sense of touch. Each contact point is like a light bulb, but none of these are static nor permanent. So it is extremely helpful to have the thumb anchored on the string above the one assigned to the index to monitor the hand's position and help with its stability. The wrist's flexion and extension interestingly produces an involuntary opposite movement of the finger knuckles, working as a sort of stabilizing system between the hand and the relaxed fingers. We can position the index and thumb tips near each other while they are relaxed by calibrating the angle of the wrist. The rotation needed to get from a parallel position to an oblique one will be executed by the wrist's lateral rotation and the corresponding slight flexion of the ring and middle fingers when going parallel, or their extension when going oblique. As a consequence of this rotation, the index, together with its anchored neighbor the thumb, will be displaced by two strings or two positions downwards when moving towards a parallel position, and by two strings or positions upwards when moving to the oblique position. The fingers rely on the stability of the hand, which in turn depends on the stability of the wrist. To remain still, the wrist needs to perform a so-called isometric contraction, in which it will maintain its angle despite the gradual increase of the string's resistance as we bend and release them. An isometric contraction is what the wrist muscles would do to maintain its angle while, for example, holding a vase as its weight increases while being filled with water. Every joint is able to perform an isometric contraction to lock an angle despite the variations on the workload. For example, we need the DIP joint to perform an isometric contraction when we push the string rather than to let it give in to the string's resistance. The space between the 19th fret and the bridge is the area exclusively meant for the right hand to operate. Yet, the tone quality as well as the string's tension will vary significantly depending on where exactly we choose to plug the string within this right hand zone. The closer to the bridge, the brighter the tone of our sound is, and the closer to the frets, the darker the sound becomes. This tonal range is a great means for musical expression and can even help us create the illusion that we're playing different instruments. Yet, it is important to find and define a neutral center position within this range that has a balanced sound to the ears and a manageable, comfortable string tension to the fingers, and from which we can produce contrasting tone colors by moving occasionally to the brighter or to the darker side. This can be a somewhat subjective decision, but to me, this neutral point happens to be coincidentally almost exactly at the middle point between the bridge and the fretboard, above the rosette, and next to the sound hole for the first string. When we bend the string, we create an angle with its equilibrium position at the saddle. The size of this angle reflects the level of energy accumulated, which will determine the volume of our sound when releasing the string. The farther the finger is from the saddle, the more we will need to displace the string to produce the same angle size. This is why it seems like the string is heavier or more tense when closer to the bridge, and more loose when closer to the fretboard. The same increment on the angle and sound volume can be accomplished with a shorter displacement of the string closer to the bridge than farther away from it. The authority of the fingers over the strings depends on the stability of the hand as well as the stability of the guitar. The stability of our instrument is crucial for our fingers to work with control and precision, but one logical step before creating stability is to find balance. The center of gravity in most classical guitars is located at around the 13th or 14th fret, which means that any straight line that crosses through it will distribute the weight evenly on each side. We can grip the guitar's body by clamping onto either the soundboard and back, or onto the sides. So a guitar can sit still on a flat surface, either laying on its back or sitting on its sides. When sitting on a chair, our leg sides are the closest thing similar to a flat horizontal surface. If we elevate our left leg by stepping on a footstool, the guitar waist will fit on it like a piece of a puzzle. For the guitar to be balanced, though, we will need to sit close enough to the edge of our chair, abduct our legs, and rotate the guitar until the line between the waist and the center of mass is parallel to Earth's gravity. This position will place the guitar neck at about 45 degrees. We can lock this position by letting the bottom binding edge of the back rest on our right thigh, near the symmetry line, and creating a grip with our right forearm resting over the edge of the soundboard on the lower bout. The direction of this clamping force is neither parallel to the soundboard nor the sides, and therefore it stabilizes both axes simultaneously, allowing us to hold the guitar firmly and our left hand to move freely. In a parallel or in an oblique position, the fingers are each assigned to a specific string. We can name these positions more precisely after the name of the string to which the index is assigned to. The most efficient way to transport the hand to different positions without changing the angle between the fingers and strings is to assign this role to our shoulder's glenohumeral joint, which is a ball in a socket joint. The simple and effective structure of the ball and socket joint, which we only have on our shoulder's rotator cuff and hips, allows it to move in all axes: flexion, extension, abduction, adduction, rotation, and circumduction. Since our glenohumeral joint is the joint with the widest range of motion in our body, we don't need to move the collarbone or the scapula, that form the shoulder girdle, to transport the fingers to different positions. Because of their metal wound, the more we bend the bass strings, the more prone they are to bump onto the frets or to make scratchy sounds as the nails slide through them. To minimize this, we can gradually get closer to the bridge as we move towards the bass strings, and this will happen naturally in the shoulder's trajectory. The opposite will happen if we allow the elbow to transport the fingers, and yet we tend to do this intuitively to avoid the friction that the moving forearm produces at its point of contact with the binding edge. Since we are holding the guitar in balance, only a small amount of weight will be needed from the arm to lock the position. And if we wear a long-sleeved garment or a piece of smooth fabric on the forearm, we will minimize the friction and be able to move our arm to transport the fingers to different positions while keeping the guitar steady. Although each finger is assigned to a specific string in an oblique position, when needed, each finger should be able and willing to occasionally visit their neighbor by flexing or extending and without changing the hand position, whenever a neighbor needs help with some repetitive pattern on their corresponding home string. In fact, the ring finger is a happy guest when the middle finger needs help, since by doing so, it will be closer to its center of gravity. Likewise, since the middle finger is long, it won't mind extending to help the ring if needed. Or even curling to help the index. In turn, the index can help the middle by extending to its string. With a little help from the arm, the index can even help the ring. The ring finger has the disadvantage of having to extend farther away from its relaxed position just to arrive to its home string. So we must avoid at all costs asking it to extend even further away than its corresponding string, especially when it is in charge, as it many times is, of playing the main melody. If it ever needs to go farther than its corresponding string, we will be better off changing the hand position to transport the ring finger to whatever string it needs to play, and make the index and/or middle fingers flex to reach their strings instead. When we bend the string, we divide it into two straight sections with a kink in between. This kink, which will be imprinted on the string, will travel back and forth through it, and its shape will determine the quality of our sound. We can have more control over the shape of this kink by using our fingernail instead of the soft tissue of the skin. If the nail fold is shaped as a convex ramp, it will move the string away from the skin as we begin the release. As the string tries to return back to its equilibrium position, the rotation of the distal phalanx can trap the string. So the nail should be long enough to move the string away from the skin, but short enough to let it slide away when the block between the string and the equilibrium position is removed. Even though the thumb looks shorter than the other digits since it only has 2 phalanx, as opposed to the 3 that each finger has, its carpometacarpal joint at its base is the only saddle-type joint in the hand. This means that the bones that conform it are shaped like a saddle and a horse rider at the point of conjunction. The legs of the top piece, which wrap around the body of the bottom piece, allow a rotation this way. The body of the top piece can glide inside the legs of the bottom piece. So this unique structure allows the joint to flex, extend, abduct, adduct, circumduct, and very slightly rotate. The other two joints of the thumb are an ellipsoid joint that can flex, extend, and barely move sideways, and a hinge joint that can only move in one axis. The carpometacarpal joint of the thumb is the one with the widest range of motion in the whole hand, and this allows the thumb to move in multiple axes and to be an extremely independent digit. Comparably, the carpometacarpal joints of the index and middle fingers have no movement at all, while the ring and pinkies can move very slightly if needed. Its carpometacarpal joint's superior range of mobility allows the thumb to be the only truly independent member of the team, able to navigate through different strings with no help from the arm. While the fingers depend on the arm to take them to different positions, the thumb can move from one string to another all by itself. The thumb can stabilize itself and stay on the same string while the arm moves to take the fingers through different strings. Or it can even move in the opposite direction. When required to play, the thumb will stop being an anchor and work on the strings above the ones assigned to the fingers. When the fingers and the wrist are relaxed, and the wrist is allowed to bend backwards as it likes to do, the relaxed thumb, which doesn't have the need to curl in like the fingers, will normally sit over the index on its lateral side. Although this position is good for holding a key, for example, it does not have the thumb position opposite to the fingers, as we can tell by the direction of its nail that points sideways to that of the fingers. To perform the opposition that it is so famous for, the thumb will need to move away from the index and turn inwards to face its tip. For the tips to meet each other, we would need to extend the index. The other fingers can also extend away from the relaxed position if they want their tips to meet that of the thumb. Another way to get the thumb's tip to line up with that of the fingers is to start off with a relaxed hand position and just flex the wrist forward, which will make all the still relaxed fingers extend involuntarily while the thumb is moved in the opposite direction. Just like the flexion of the MCP joint produces an involuntary extension of the DIP joint, the flexion of the wrist produces an involuntary extension of the knuckles, and vice versa, which places the tip of the relaxed fingers closer to the thumb's tip without them making any effort. This is why when we snap our fingers, we flex the wrist for the middle and thumb to meet and push against each other, and extend the wrist for them to separate. The wrist's medial range of motion is of about 130 degrees, and yet, without the interference of an external force, such as gravity, the relaxed wrist likes to sit very close to the end of its range of extension and far from the end of its range of flexion. So when we flex the wrist slightly forward, although the wrist is away from its relaxed position, it will be around the center of its full range of medial motion. If the strings are presented to a relaxed hand, the thumb will need to extend outwards to find its corresponding bass strings, making contact with the lateral surface of the distal phalanx. The thumb can then bend the string inwards and release it by turning down and outwards. The carpometacarpal joint alone can produce the movements in all these axes. Even though the DIP and MCP joints are closer to the tip of the thumb, we don't need them to interfere with the carpometacarpal joint maneuvers. So it is preferable to keep these joints still by making them perform an isometric contraction and allow the carpometacarpal joint to bypass them and take control of the tip's movements. Fortunately, we don't need to consider using one of these to produce a narrower kink on the string. If we let our thumbnail grow and shape it with a gentle convex curve, the nail can make contact with the string if we slightly increase the angle between the thumb and the string. As the angle increases, the more nail will cross through the string, so the less its length needs to be. As we push the string with the adipose tissue of the phalanx lateral surface, a larger section of the nail fold can get exposed to the string and can easily trap it under as we try to make a turn to release it. We can solve this problem by increasing the angle between the thumb and the string, so that the release point is moved closer to the nail's free edge. This angle will increase as we move the wrist away from the soundboard. Doing so will also move the thumb's tip closer to the fingers, allowing the group to have a better grip of the strings, which is very helpful when the thumb needs to play simultaneously with the fingers. When using the nail, the initial contact with the string should happen simultaneously at the free edge of the nail and at the thumb's pad. These two contact points can be maintained while we bend the string before it moves towards the nail fold for the release to take place. The thumb can move up and down by itself, and the distal joint can maintain the angle between the nail and the string by stabilizing the distal phalanx to counter the effect of the thumb's rotation. Just like the thumb must anchor when it's not playing, the fingers should also become anchors when the thumb plays alone. The anchored fingers contribute to the stability of the hand, allowing the thumb to direct its energy more efficiently towards the string, or play short staccato chords. Having the fingers as anchors allows the hand to use the strings as rail tracks to move horizontally with confidence. If we want to change our tone or play octave harmonics, for example, we can quickly move the thumb closer to the bridge without getting derailed from our position. As an alternative, the thumb can bend and release the string by moving in one single direction and landing on the bottom neighbor string, producing a louder sound and an anchor point. To minimize the string's resistance, we can perform this so-called rest stroke using the pulp and avoiding the nail. This can be very useful when the thumb has to play far from the index, at the end of its range of extension, where it's harder to use the nail, as well as to add more colors to the thumb notes. The softness of the skin makes it easier to slide through multiple strings with less resistance. Besides the anchor points, the thumb skin produces a closed and bassy tone that contrasts nicely with the fingernail's brighter sound. The softness of the skin can slow down the release, so we will need to invest slightly more muscle power to play louder. We can also lock the carpometacarpal joint with an isometric contraction and have the strength of the elbow take over. The possibilities are endless. For example, in flamenco music, Many times the fingers can step outside of these positions, or the thumb can pretty much take over the strings, and it can even engage more powerful muscles like the ones that rotate the forearm. Ultimately, it's important to recognize that while the guitar may seem complex, it is a very simple design compared to our own anatomy. So the instrument that we really want to understand and master is our own body. Dear friends, thank you so much for your incredible feedback and support. Now that the main 2 core videos are finished, I will be producing and uploading more specific and practical videos about technique and repertoire, practice routines, and expanding on many of the topics that I discussed on the previous overview videos. Your support is essential to make all this possible, so please consider subscribing to my channel or becoming a member for early viewing of my content without ads. So thank you again, and I will see you in the next video.